during the vetting process that he was working as a foreign agent for Turkey and getting paid a lot for it during the campaign?
Look, I do think you're right. It should have come up in the vetting process, and particularly today during the press briefing when, Spicer was asked the question about you had the transition attorney who was informed about this, and instead of addressing that, why didn't that information get disseminated to Trump himself or someone in the hiring process? He kind of didn't have an answer to that. My inclination, I believe the White House didn't know about this. I believe that they didn't know he was considering registering as a foreign agent, but I think it was overlooked in the transition process. And my father always said, if you've got to eat crow now, and that's the Southern way of saying sometimes you've just got to own up to the fact we missed this one. It was overlooked in the process, and I think that's what Sean should have done today.
Bakari?
Well, that's not true because the White House did know about it, and specifically the Vice President knew about it because, if I'm not mistaken, Elijah Cummings actually sent a letter directly to the Vice President of the United States during the transition process, letting him know that there were relationships between Michael Flynn and Turkey. And so when we're talking about what the White House knew and when they knew it, which is a famous phrase from before I was born, if I may say, I do think that the ineptitude of the transition is something we keep coming back to. It's something that we talked about in the first segment. It's something we'll talk about now, and it's something we'll talk about in the future.
But the Vice President never got that specifically, and that letter, by the way, was sent the day he was hired, so it never made it into the Vice President.
Well, I mean, the fact that the Vice President, during a transition period, never got a letter that informed him from a ranking member of a House committee that there were nefarious relationships, or at least relationships she should be aware of, just shows the flaws in the transition process. And I think that's all I'm saying. I'm saying that this transition process did not live up to the standards. And for anyone to say that the White House didn't know about it, it is willful ignorance at best.
So, Kirsten, I want to talk about another series of data points that we got over the last 48 hours as people are looking at and going, that's odd. So Nigel Farage, from Great Britain, who is friends with Donald Trump and was pushing the Brexit, met with Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, walked into the Ecuadorian embassy in London, had a meeting with Julian Assange of WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, as we know, released all that stuff hacked during the election. It's one of these things where I don't know if you can connect the dots, but there are a lot of dots here.
There are a lot of dots, but I do think we have to be careful about speculating about things that we don't know. So there are things that look bad. It doesn't mean that we necessarily know that somehow that was connected to things that were happening with Donald Trump. So I'm a little, I like to wait and see and get more facts before I start making accusations. But can we go back to this FISA stuff about what Jason was saying? I mean, if you're saying, that we know people were being tapped, if you want to accept that, then that actually is more of an indictment of the Trump people than anybody else. Because if that happened, that means a FISA court had reason to believe that they were doing something nefarious. So that's what's sort of ironic about this accusation, is that indirectly Donald Trump is sort of saying that they were doing something wrong. Unless you believe the FISA court just lets them go and tap whoever they want. The other thing I was going to say is, why doesn't he just declassify this? I mean, if this is true, why doesn't he just declassify all the information around it and release it and let everybody see it?
Yes, push back on that and say that we saw with this previous administration so many aspects of the federal government becoming politicized, whether it's the IRS targeting people. Certainly, the folks in the Clinton campaign would take issue with the way that the certain aspects of law enforcement was run, particularly during past year. I think Bakari would probably agree with me on that one.
That's the height of irony for you to invoke Director Comey in your defense.
But look, I think the fact that we've seen so much of this happen before, I mean, we don't know the details on it. Clearly, it was rejected one time, it was gone with another time. But all this really is a big chase down the rabbit hole to try to essentially smear the president and say that there's some sort of foreign involvement that made him win, when the fact of the matter was he ran a better campaign.
Again, the president may have dug this rabbit hole himself with that tweet last week. We will find out a lot more over the next 8 days.
They were tapping I mean, we know it from the New York Times. I mean, they were recording conversations.
They were recording someone else's conversations. We don't know who is in. We don't know why yet.
The United States did not tap Donald Trump. And if you can't say that, then that's the ultimate rabbit hole that's being chased.
All right, guys.